The courtroom was quiet. Not the kind of silence that's empty, but the kind that hangs in the air, tense, expectant. Standing alone in the center of courtroom 3B at the Jefferson County Courthouse in Alabama was a man whose denim shirt looked out of place among the suits and ties. His name was Luther Hayes. He wasn't nervous, not really. His hands, rough and sun-leathered from years of coaxing life out of stubborn soil, stayed steady at his sides. He wore the same button-up he'd worn to church last Sunday, faded at the collar and elbows, tucked into old jeans with mud still dried near the hems. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said evenly, eyes locking with Judge Miranda Sloan's across the polished bench. "I'm here because that new pipeline's cut off the water from my south field." There it was. A chuckle. Soft, but it sliced like a blade. It slipped from Judge Sloan's mouth, a breathy, dismissive sound, and her lips curled. She glanced sideways at the court reporter like they shared some inside joke. "Irrigation," she said, mimicking the long drawl in Luther's voice with the kind of tone one might use with a toddler. "You mean irrigation, Mr. Hayes?" Luther didn't blink. "Yes, ma'am," he replied calmly. "That's what I said." A ripple of whispers moved through the gallery. Nothing loud, but far from silent. A woman near the front adjusted her purse. A man in the back cleared his throat. The bailiff shifted his weight. Judge Sloan, who'd presided over murder trials, land disputes, and custody battles for more than 2 decades, regarded this rural water rights hearing as just another forgettable case. One more blip on her docket. But Luther's calm tone, unbothered and grounded, pierced through her assumptions. "Well, Mr. Hayes," she said, still smiling, "why don't you try explaining your complaint again clearly this time?" Luther inhaled. Not because he was angry, because he'd seen this scene before, heard this tone before, in bank offices, in feed stores, at zoning board meetings. He adjusted his stance. "I've worked the same land my grandfather cleared by hand," he said. "Ain't a skin for charity. Just need the water that's always run through my field. For 60 years, we've used that stream to keep our crops alive." Blake Hensley, the corporate lawyer for Core South Drainage and Pipeline, rose from the defendant's table. "Your Honor, if we could return to the legal specifics." "I am speaking specifics," Luther replied, eyes fixed forward. "That pipe was laid past the county line without notice. They rerouted a stream that feeds our irrigation pumps. Now we're paying thousands to truck in water we already had." Judge Sloan blinked. She hadn't expected him to come prepared. She glanced at her clerk, who began flipping nervously through the complaint file. Luther stepped forward and pulled a document from his pocket. "This here's a copy of the letter I sent to county utilities back in March." No one responded, but I got a receipt signed. He handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the bench. Judge Sloan scanned the letter. Her smile faded slightly. But Luther wasn't done. "I know how I sound," he said. "I know how folks hear it. But I ain't here for laughs. I'm here 'cause this land fed my family, buried my daddy, and taught me how to stand up when somebody tries to take what's ours." The room stilled. Judge Sloan shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her eyes flicked to the gallery, then the file, then Luther, then her own nameplate, brass and gleaming. "May I finish?" he asked, his voice steady. She gave a small nod. Not patronizing this time, measured. Respectful. And then Luther began to speak, not like a man presenting a complaint, but like a man who carried generations of stories in his bones. Most people in the room didn't know much about Luther Hayes. They saw a black farmer in muddy boots, slow drawl, weathered hands. They didn't know about the 86 acres of stubborn Alabama clay back in Chambers County, about the soybean rows he rotated with okra and collards, about the pecan trees his grandfather planted during the Dust Bowl. They didn't know that Luther's mama once ran a produce stand off Highway 50 and never turned away a hungry neighbor, that his father fixed tractors with a wrench in one hand and a hymnal in the other, that they never spoke about dreams much in the Hayes household, not because they didn't have any, but because work came first. Always. And they certainly didn't know what it meant to survive droughts, economic crashes, and racial roadblocks to still be standing. Still farming. Still here. "I ain't standing here 'cause I want to be," Luther said. "I'm standing here 'cause nobody came knocking before they cut off the water that's fed our fields for generations." Blake Hensley leaned into his mic again. "Your Honor, we object to this emotional." Luther didn't look at him. "It ain't emotion. It's fact. You want numbers?" I got M. He opened a folder and pulled out water flow charts, satellite images, and receipts for water delivery services. There were photos of brown crops, cracked soil, dying rows of plants that once fed the community. The room leaned in. Even Blake Hensley had stopped fidgeting. Luther reached for one last papera yellowed, handwritten letter. The ink had faded, but the words still held weight. This here, he said, holding it gently, is a letter my daddy wrote his father back in 1964. He'd just come back from helping farmers in Lowndes County. Some developer rerouted a creek without saying a word. My daddy wrote, "Don't let him take something from you just 'cause they don't think you'll fight." He folded the letter with care. That's why I'm here. Not for no pity. Not for a handout. Just to say that what you laugh at don't mean it don't matter. The courtroom was quiet again. But it wasn't tension this time. It was reverence. Judge Sloan's face had changed. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers tapped her pen against the bench with less certainty. A teenage girl in the back, sitting beside her mother, pressed record on her phone. Not for views, but because she knew this was history. Luther looked up at the judge one last time. I know I don't sound like no lawyer. I know I ain't got a degree. But I know my land. I know what was taken. And if a man's words get laughed at before he even finishes speaking, how's he ever supposed to be heard? You could have heard the ceiling fan tick. Finally, Judge Sloan looked down. No longer smug. Just still. We'll recess for 10 minutes, she said quietly, tapping her gavel once. Luther didn't flinch. He didn't nod. He stepped back and sat, folder still in his hands. But outside the courtroom, the world had started to turn. By the time court resumed that afternoon, the clip had gone viral. 30,000 views. Then 70. Then 150. Caption: Judge laughs at farmer's accent, regrets it 30 seconds later. In Baton Rouge, a teacher showed it to her husband over dinner. In Atlanta, a group of college students watched it between classes. In Detroit, a civil rights lawyer forwarded it to her network with the subject line, "This one matters." The algorithm had done its job. But it wasn't just the algorithm. It was Luther. It was truth. The next day, courtroom 3B was packed. Not with cameras but people. Neighbors. Strangers. Students. Elders. People who saw in Luther a piece of their father, or uncle, or younger selves. Even Judge Sloan noticed it. She sat straighter. Adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "thank you for your patience. I've reviewed your submitted documents." Luther nodded once. "Appreciate that, ma'am." Blake Hensley rose. "Your Honor, we maintain that CoreSouth acted within its legal boundaries. The stream in question was not clearly recorded under the Hayes property on county infrastructure maps at the time of construction." Luther stood, pulling out an old, hand-drawn map. "'Cause the county ain't updated them since 1980. That stream's been running the same way since my granddaddy was 16. Ink don't move land. Rain does." The judge leaned forward. "Let me see that." She compared his map to the county's. She read in silence. Then she looked up. "This court finds that CoreSouth Drainage acted without proper notification and procedural review. Mr. Hayes is entitled to compensation for water-related losses, and restoration of the original stream path must be completed within 30 days. No one cheered. No one clapped. But everyone felt it. A shift. A correction. A weight lifted. Luther exhaled. Not with victory. Just with relief. Judge Sloan wasn't done. "I also wish to acknowledge my behavior yesterday. I responded inappropriately. My tone was unprofessional, and I apologize." Luther gave one small nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." He didn't give a speech. He didn't celebrate. He walked out the same way he walked in. Quiet. Grounded. A few people clapped him on the shoulder. Others just nodded. Outside, a local news crew tried to find him. They didn't. Because Luther didn't need cameras. He had fields waiting. That night, Judge Sloan sat in her office long after everyone left. She ignored her emails. Opened a drawer. Inside was a sticky note from her first year as a judge. "Listen twice. Rule once." She stared at it. And knew. She had almost forgotten what it meant. But not anymore. Because of a man named Luther Hayes. A man who never raised his voice. Never shouted. And still managed to shake the internet and the system be speaking plain truth. The clip would reach over 3 million views. Translated in 7 languages. Played in classrooms. Pinned in barbershops. Quoted in speeches. Because sometimes the quietest voice is the one that finally gets heard. And the words that sound the simplest, they're the ones that change everything.